Hello, so this is the follow-up video, the supplementary video for the first lesson. Because we were able to complete as many crates, the simple crates as we did in class, we ended up looking at the UV and stuff as well. So I know that was a bit of a head slap for a lot of people, if not everyone. It is difficult to first get the concepts of UV in, but just stick at it. It's going to make a lot more sense as you keep working on it, and we'll find ways of just making it a bit easy to understand. So what I'm going to do is go from stage one all the way to the end of a UV'd ready to texture model in this video, and just kind of reiterate what we went over in class, and hopefully this is going to be very easy, useful for you. So here we've got our finalized crate. I've just turned this on, this little icon up here. That showed me my wireframe, basically showing me the skeleton of my model. So let's go over it, so I can see that. And then I've also got my UVs done. So my UVs in my 0 to 1 space. It's 0 down here to 1 up here, right there. So let's go make this again. So I'm going to go to File, New Scene, because I just want to start from fresh. Now I'm going to start making that project. I'm going to not save to the desktop and all that kind of jazz. Like I said, I'm going to make a project. So I've got a hub to save all my work to. So I'm going to File, Project Window. I'm going to name my thing. So I'm going to go to New, click New, because that'll allow me to actually create the project. It's a bit weird, but it's what it is. Call this whatever, like create. I don't know. It doesn't have to. My location is where I'm going to save this, so I'm just going to make sure it's on my desktop. Boom. And then if I want to, I can move that into my OneDrive, so then I can access it later on anywhere else. And that's I'm good. I'm good to go. So I click accept. So my project's been made, and hypothetically, it should be actually saving all my work to the scene folder of that folder. So if I go to File, Save Scene As, I select there, so I've got my desktop, my project I've just made, and my scenes folder. So all my Maya files, all my scene files, my work files, are going to be saved to here. So I'm happy with that. Right, so let's go. So what is the base primitive of a crate? The one that we're making, it's a cube. It's a very, very simple cube. Before I do anything, I'm just going to make sure that I've got interactive creation turned on. So I've got to create polygon primitives, and then just down to interactive creation. And I'm just going to make sure it's ticked. Because if not, every time you click one of these primitives, it makes a very, very small version of it in the middle of the world. And this is okay, but one, it's very small. But the main reason is it's going through the floor. So it's a little bit more work for us to get this working right. So I'm going to delete that by pressing the delete key. I'm going to create polygon primitives, interactive creation, turn on. And then when I click my cube, instead it's going to ask me to drag the base out on the grid and drag up the height. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to hold shift and do that instead, because if I don't do that, I don't get a perfect cube. But we want a perfect cube. So I'm going to hold shift on the keyboard. I'm going to drag out a new cube. So nice and big, because we want to work nice and big for this, like that. Before I start doing anything else, I'm just going to make sure that in my channel box, if I can't see my channel box on the right here, I'm just going to press the 3 stacks of paper up on the very, very top right here. Channel box. I'm just going to change my translate X to 0 to move it to the 0 position on the X axis. And then my translate Z to move it to the 0 axis to 0 on the Z axis. I'm not going to change my Y axis, because if I did turn that to 0, it's going to go through the floor, which is what I don't want to do. So I'm just going to leave that how it is. Perfect. I'm going to do a save because I've done a bunch of work. I just want to make sure that I don't lose any of it. So I'm going to do a save. I'm not going to move away from this file. I'm going to let Maya save where it wants to save. So I'm going to call this crates_01 because this is my incremental saving. This is the first file in this increment. Save that. Yeah, that's fine. Cool. Right, so I'm going to turn on that wireframe thing because we're dealing with, I'd like to see the wireframe on this. So I'm just going to come up to this little icon here, click it, and I can see the wireframe. So this is a really simple step-by-step process. We've already done step 1, which is making our project. We've already done step 2, which is making our cube. And now we're up to step 3. And step 3 is to delete all the faces except the very top face, because that's the one you're going to build from. Again, hypothetically, you could do this from any face. You could leave any face behind and build it from there. It doesn't really matter. I just find the top face is just a little bit, oh, it's a top face. It makes it a bit easy to deal with. So I'm just going to select my faces. Now, how do I select different components? How do I select an edge? How do I select a vertex? Or how do I select a face? Very, very easy. If I hold right click, we get a context menu. A context menu is simply how we choose to interact with this component. We can ignore this box down here. This box for us is very, very useless. We don't need it yet. There's a couple of things in here that we're going to use eventually. But really, all we care about is this top radial menu, this round menu up here. Now, I want to select faces. So I'm going to go down here and just hover over face, and then release my mouse, and then we're in face mode. You can see as I hover around, it's going to turn red, basically saying, do you want to select this? If I do select it, it turns orange. Super simple. So I want to leave this top face behind. So instead, I'm going to just drag a small box over the middle section there, making sure that I'm trying to get all these bottom faces. I'm just going to rotate around to make sure that I've got all those faces selected, the one underneath. I'm rotating around by just holding Alt, remember? So Alt, left mouse button is my rotate. Alt, middle mouse button is my pan. Alt and right mouse button is my dolly zoom, this nice smooth zoom. Oops. And then if I just rock the mouse wheel, that's kind of like an incremental jumping zoom. So with all those selected, I'm just going to hit the delete key, like that. Super awesome. Now I'm going to do a save, because again, done all that work, I want to make sure I'm saving. It might seem that I'm kind of taking the pee with this a little bit, but it's really good practice for us to get into saving regular and saving incrementally. Because if you work for 3, 4, 5 hours on something you don't save, you're always increasing the risk of something going wrong and losing all that work. So it's good to get back into the routine. It's good to get into the routine of saving. ABS, always be saving. It's something you'll hear me say a lot. So now that we've deleted all that bottom face, now we're up to stage 4. So I want to make that actual. I actually want to make the face of my crate, because we only need to do it with one face. So in face mode again, because I want to actually deal with the faces to do this, I'm just going to click this top face like that, and then I'm going to use my first tool, which is my extrude tool, which is this one right here, the white base with the orange tower. If you hover over it, it will give you the name of it and a brief explanation about what it does. If I click that once, it turns black, because what happens, because we're dealing with a single polygon, a single face, it turns it into a 3-dimensional cube. But by doing that, it kind of makes it look like it breaks, it turns black. But that's fine, that's just what happens. What I'm going to do is, this new menu that pops up, I'm just going to find offset. This is offset here. I'm going to click the word offset itself, click and hold the word offset. And if I start dragging left and right, you can see I can drag left to increase the offset and right to decrease the offset. I want to decrease the offset so that I'm making a little bit of a frame around my object right here. So remember what this shimmering means as well, this black and grey shimmering. This is Z fighting. We've got 2 faces that are in the exact same position. In this case, one is grey and one is black. So they're fighting to be seen. But we're going to get rid of that black face eventually in a second. Now, I'm just going to move my camera. Be careful not to deselect. This just means it's a bit awkward to deselect it, to reselect it. But I'm just going to move my camera a little bit, keeping this selected. I'm going to hit extrude again. And then I'm going to use the thickness in this case to actually just decrease, push it in a little. I'm going to push in this little bucket, my little insert, in a little bit. Like that. So that's actually like the recess of my crate. Now up top, we can see that this black face in the middle is a solid black. It actually means I can select it. You can see the entire thing now is an orange because I'm selecting this big black face. And then I'm just going to delete, get rid of it, and then we've just got this. So now we've got a perfectly nice section of crate all our modeling's done, all our physical modeling's actually done in this case. I'm going to do another save. So save scene as, make this my number 3. Yep, cool, super awesome. So now that my main modeling task is done, and the reason why I did this and did this on a single plane rather than a whole cube is because every side of this polygon or every side of this model is going to be exactly the same. So why should I go through and model each face individually when I can make one and then duplicate that over and over again? So I'm just going back to object mode. So I'm making sure that I'm holding right click and then go to object mode. I do not want to be in face mode. I don't want to be able to select these faces. That's because I actually want to select an object so that if I press E for my rotate tool, my gimbal, my manipulator, is actually in the middle of what would have been the original cube. If I'm in face mode, or any sort of selection component mode, face, edge, vertex, the pivot point is going to be in the middle of the selection like this. So I do not want this, I do not want this, because if I'm selecting, like, say, there, it means that my pivot point is going to be in the middle of the selection because I'm only selecting these two faces. You know, you get the drift. So I want to be in object mode because this is still maintaining that center pivot point of my cube. So this is actually a really, really simple part. It's just about duplicating, making sure we're being careful about duplicating so we're not double duplicating. Or duplicating and then not moving something, or duplicating too many versions. I did see that a good few times today. It's something that always happens, and it's like I said, it's a good thing that we do this, that we make these mistakes. Is that people were duplicating multiple different versions on top of each other and leaving them there. So then when you combine and merge, and then we just checked it with that proxy smooth, you get that one side or that couple of sides which are just not smoothing out. That gives us the impression, that tells us that something's gone wrong in that area. So making sure that my channel box is open. So again, it should still be open, just making sure that if it isn't, we click those 3 stacks of paper right there. And what I'm going to do is just press E, like I said before, for my rotate tool. I'm just going to start rotating in one of these axes. I'm not going to grab this top ring because that's a camera rotation. It doesn't rotate how I want it. So instead, what I'm going to do is just grab either the blue axis for the Z, red axis for the X, Y axis is green. Let's start rotating. So Control D to duplicate. Now remember what I said as well, Maya doesn't necessarily shout at you that it's duplicated something, so you've just got to be a bit careful with your duplicate. And then start rotating. And what I'm looking for is what number is going to be updated here. It doesn't need me trying to get this bang on, or anything. I don't need to kind of try and struggle to get this matched up. I can just nudge it a tiny bit in the right direction. As long as I see the numbers updating here, or that I know the axis I'm going to need to rotate. So this is starting to rotate in a minus. Now, luckily as well, we're only dealing with 90-degree angles or associated angles. So the closest angle to this is minus 90. So I'm going to type in minus 90, enter to complete that. Hey, look at that. That's really cool. I'm going to do it again. So I'm going to select this, Control D to duplicate, start rotating it in the same direction. You can see that's now updating a little bit more. Well, obviously it's going to be rotating in the same direction. So what's next in the row? 180. Click on this, duplicate. Well, this is now going to be 270 or minus 270. Like that. So I can grab this now, and then I can rotate it in the next direction just to fill in the sides. And I can see there my rotate X is now updating to minus 28. So right there I can say, okay, that's going to be minus 90, like that. And then I can grab that again, duplicate, start rotating it in the other direction. This is going to be positive 90 because it's in the other direction. So just type in 90. There we go. Stupidly simple, very, very simple. But what we're doing here is we're getting to grips with the channel box, we're getting to grips with rotation, a little bit of hotkey stuff with the Control D, nice control of our model. It's super easy, like that. So now our model's getting very, very close to being done. So next step is actually to do a save. Let's do a save. you go. So now, if I just in object mode, so because I don't want to deal with face mode or vertex mode or anything like that, I want to be in object mode because I want to select objects. If I just grab everything, so I'm just going to drag a marquee box, a selection box over everything. I'm going to hit our next tool, which is the combine tool, which is on our little taskbar. It's the first icon to the right of the blue icons here. It's like a little white circle with two orange papers in it. Pardon me. Click that. Everything turns green, meaning it's one selection mode. If I just control you back a little bit now, the reason we've got one green object and the rest are white is because in this case, there's a selection hierarchy. One object is going to be the parent. This object right here, the green one, is the parent. The rest of them are children because they're technically behind the scenes. Whatever happens to this, they're going to follow this. So whenever you see lots of different white ones and a green one, they're all children selections, and this is the parent selection. This is kind of like technical knowledge which we're not going to be using all the time or at all in the first few lessons, but it's good to know. There is stuff like hierarchy selection that it's just good to know about. Right, with all those selected, yes, we're going to combine. So now it's all on selection mode. However, if I press 3 on the keyboard, it's not going to be one solid object. We get a lot of plates. That's showing me that, yeah, though these are one selection, they're not physically connected to each other just yet. Now that brings in our third tool, which is the merge tool, and it's this one right here. So it's left of the big orange circle, merge. So now if I click that, even with this property smooth turned on, if I click that, this is what I want to see. This is showing me that all these are perfectly put together. Awesome. Now I'm going to jump back and actually make a mistake somewhere. I'm going to intentionally make a mistake. Okay. So I've just done something there. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I've just done something. So combine and then merge. Now if I press 3 to proxy smooth, this isn't looking very great because things are trying to smooth out here. You can try to think things are trying to smooth out, but two faces are pretty much staying as they were. Now this is why I'm using proxy smooth a lot. This is a really good way to check if the model is good. It's to check if the model is correct and if anything's wrong with it, because it's going to be very noticeable if that happens. What has happened here is I've over duplicated on this side and on this side. There's two duplications of this face that have been combined and merged to each other, and the same for this one. So that's why I always check with a proxy smooth, because you would never know just looking at this. But if I do this, I can see. And why that's important is because if I try and UV this, it's guaranteed to crash. Maya's not going to know what to do with it. And it's just, you don't want to take this kind of information into a game engine. It's not going to work well. There can be a lot of bugs and a lot of Z fighting and a lot of things we don't want to actually happen. So if I just press 3 and I can see, okay, there's issues with that. If I know what the issue is, I can see here that this is a good indication that I've got duplications on top of each other. I can just Control Z back a few times to when I did my combine. There we go. There we go. Now I know if I just click that and hit delete, if one's left behind, we're in the right direction. If I click it again and delete it, okay, cool. I've come to the end one there. I've come to the last one, so I can Control G back, bring that one in, go around to the other side because it was on the other side, and do the same thing. I'm going to click. I'm going to make sure not to accidentally drag click and over select things I don't want to select. Just going to take my time and just make sure I'm clicking one thing, hit delete. Okay, see how far this goes. Hit delete again. Cool. Okay, so that looks like everything's good. So I'm going to just select everything, combine, merge, press 3, boom, banging. That's awesome. Perfect, great. So now if I do that, everything should be combined together. If things aren't, if you've got like holes or things that are matching up, it's because that'll come from the when we're rotating stuff around, and we've got when we're doing our 90-degree angles and then snapping stuff in, duplicating all that kind of stuff. you've probably added or you slightly rotate across another axis. So what we really need when we're doing this, we really need everything to either be a 90 degree, 270, or 180, or a 0 in these rotate boxes here. If there's any like decimal numbers or any slight numbers that aren't 90 or whatever, you need to sort those numbers out. Right, let's do a save. Because the model is technically finished now, the actual geometry of it. But this is now where I start to go into UV mode because my model is finished. So I'm just going to suffix this at the very end with UV, just so I can tell when I'm looking at my big list of incremental saves, I can see, okay, that's when I started my UV in. So I'll click OK for that one. Yeah, it's good. So now it's time to actually do the UV in. A couple of things I want to do just as like housekeeping before I start off is just make sure that there's no rotation or translation set to this, which it shouldn't have. It should all be 0 and 1s in here. Should be perfect. And all this information here, this history, even though there's not a lot of it right here, I just want to make sure that there's none of it before I'm going to UV in. It's just good housekeeping. It's good practice. It's a good routine to keep a nice clean model when we go to UV. So how I delete the history, there's two ways. I've shown you in class the very, very quick way of coming up to this icon right here, delete by type history, and then clicking it. So you can see there that all the history disappears. The other way is to go into edit, delete all by type, history. And that does the exact same thing. So right there, this button right here is just a hotkey for this. Cool. Right, I'm going to change my workspace now from standard to UV editing, like that. By default, I have that set to default to turn on, but your UI is probably going to like this. You'll see a little square in the UV area, and you'll see a lot of white lines as well. You see white lines everywhere. I'll show you what these white lines do in a sec. It's going to make a lot more sense in a sec. So number one, what I'm going to do is turn on this little backwards Tetris shape thing. What that's going to do is it's going to shade our object. Now this is exactly like having things grey and black inside the 3D area. A surface that's blue is facing towards the camera. In this UV world, it's facing towards the camera. A red face is either facing away from the camera, basically being inverted, or it's obscured. It means it can't be read very well. If you've got a perfectly good UV, but it's red and it's flipped the other way, if that's intentional for a reason, totally cool. You don't need to worry about it. But generally, we want all our UVs to be blue if we have this shaded icon turned on, this one right here. So you see here, this doesn't represent what I'm seeing on the left here. So what I'm going to do is come up here and just do that automatic projection. So remember what I said in class, this isn't a be all and end all. This isn't going to give you the final outcome. This is just a stepping stone. So this projection is going to create 6 cameras. You can see inside here. And they're all going to be facing towards or down an axis. So we've got 2 for the positive, negative y, 2 for positive, negative x, and 2 for positive, negative z. And what that does is it reads the surface, and any polygon within 45 degrees of a certain camera, it'll snap off in its own little group and lay it out here. So you can see that I've got this, which is facing positive x, as I fell off my little gimbal down here. It's facing positive x. So any other adjoined face isn't facing positive x at all. So it doesn't get connected to any of them. So we just get this little frame. So inside here, again, this isn't facing positive x, this face, because if I look at the little gimbal. But again, the faces that are adjoined to it are not. So they're not connected. They get split up into their own little thing. So what I want to do is actually start to bring down my overall UV count, because currently we're set to, well, we've got 36 UV islands. If we look down here, we've got 36 UV islands. Depending on what you're doing, and depending on the complexity of your object, you might be forced to have a lot of UV islands. It completely depends what you're doing. For this, we want to bring this down to as little UV islands as possible. Each one of these is a UV island. And I know I can bring this down to 12, and that's what we're going to do. Because then we've got 6 frames, and then 6 interiors. That's what we're going to do. Right, so Inside here, you've still got a context menu. So if I hold down right click, you still get this radial menu. It's a little bit different though, because this little window right here is a completely different universe from this one. This has different rules. So if I right click over here, the menu's a lot bigger. There's more things to choose from because there's more things I can do. In the UV world, if I hold right click, there's fewer things because there's fewer things I can do. And what I want to do is hold down right click and go to UV shell, because this is a face selection, but it'll select the whole UV island, including things that are attached to it. And what I want to do is just grab all the big faces here, all 6 of these, press W just to get my movement tool, and I'm just going to move them out of the way. So I should left with this. Now, in class, I showed you that you can do this little bit by bit. I can do it like en masse. So I'm going to do it little bit by bit first, and then I'm going to do it en masse. So what I want to do is I want to sew these little strips onto the corresponding inset here. So if I just go to edge mode, because I want to sew these strips together across an edge. I'm not going to, you can't sew faces together, but you can sew edges together inside UV. So in edge mode, I'm just going to select an edge, so like this one right here. If I press W, you can see that my pivot point is actually down here, because this is going to be the halfway point between this and this face right here. So this little edge here is the corresponding edge to here. If we look in a 3D world, essentially it's this edge. So I'm going to sew these two things together. I'm going to go to cut and sew, and then I'm going to go to move and sew, like that. Sometimes your small piece should be going to your big piece, but sometimes this might move down to your small piece. If that happens, just go to UV shell again, grab it, and then move it from down here up to here. And I can do a multi-select, so I'm going to grab these 3 other edges. You can see how they correspond to these pieces of UV here. Cut and sew, move and sew. Boom. So now this is what we want. This is the interior here. Let's talk about the white lines for a second, because you can see white lines inside here, but we can also see white lines inside here. When the UV editor's open and this option, which should be turned on by default, is turned on, what this white line represents is a seam, is an area where 2 UVs are not connected to each other. So if I look inside here, because I sewed these edges together, that white line doesn't appear, and it's a thin blue line. But then you can see the right angles in the corners, because I don't want to sew these together, they're a white line, which is cool. So let's do the rest of them all in one go. So I've already done this, super cool. All I'm going to do is now, in edge mode, I'm just going to double click on this edge. And if you double click on an edge, it'll select the entire way around. Shift, double click this edge, all the way around, double click, double click, double click. And then I just go to cut and sew, move and sew. There you go, so those move back to those pieces. But you can see there that they've all been sewn together into the same kind of little square thing, which is super cool. Like you see down here in the UV shells count, we've got 12 shells. So we've taken that from 36 all the way down to 12 super fast. So we've slashed our max UV shell count, which is cool. Now, pardon me. Excuse me. Now what we're going to do is do a save. Here we go. So what I'm going to do now is to get prepared to lay these UVs out. Now this is where it gets a little bit weird, because it's just part and parcel of UV, and sometimes it gets a bit weird. But by doing this, it is also using our navigation skills. It is also using our selection and getting used to doing hotkeys and stuff. So bear with it. It is useful. What I want to do is just make sure that each one of these in the center is snapped to one of these grid points in here. So what I'm going to do is hold X. X is my snap to grid hotkey. So you can see up here, this icon is highlighted. So holding X, I can move and just snap it. I just need to snap it to any of them. It don't really matter. I just want to snap it to something. And I do the same thing for everything else. Now, why I'm doing that, why I'm moving around snapping these to a grid point, is because I'm going to do the exact same thing with these. I'm going to move these, snap them to the same grid point as this, so they overlap each other. Now, what I can do is just move these randomly. I can like grab this one, I can move it over here and overlay it, oops, like that, which is totally cool. You can also go through and just make sure that the same frames sit with the same recess. So what I can do is say, okay, this recess, oh, I can see those two don't match up. This one is that one. Okay. Let's just grab this frame, move it out of the way. Which frame is this? No, you, no. Okay, it's that one. Okay, so I'm going to hold X, move it over top. So now these two, they're all one side. I grab you, that's cool. Grab that, so I can snap that on top. You're there. Which one are you? You're that one. So I can grab you, put it up there. And basically just go through and do the exact same thing. There we go. Excuse me, I'm coughing a lot. I'm very, very sorry. And then this one, the bottom one, is that. And this last one, like that. Boom. Super cool. So now what we've got is everything kind of laid out in groups. We've got a little bit of overlap. You see these little thin faces are actually behind the frame. That's okay for now. We're actually going to change that in a second. So if I just grab everything and move it to the one side, I'm going to set up in these 4 quadrants here, I'm going to set up all 6 of my little groups first, and then sort out the overlap. Now, like I said in class as well, you can't fit 6 of these cubes, six of these squares, inside a perfect square without wasted space. So this does mean that we're going to have to overlap some of these, which is fine. Just part and parcel. So what I'm going to do is grab this. I'm just going to move it over so it's sitting inside one of these UV irons. The main thing I want to do is make sure that the pivot point here, this gimbal, this little manipulator, is within inside this. And then when I've done that, I'm just going to go to modify and then normalize. So normalize will basically force this object to conform to this. Now, if this was a rectangle object or not a square object, it would stretch it to fit. But because this is a perfect square, it's not going to distort at all. It's going to fit in perfectly, like that. I'm going to grab another one, bring this over, do the same thing, modify, normalize. Grab this one, bring it over, modify, normalize. Grab this one, bring it over, modify, normalize. And then with the last 2, I can just decide where I'm going to put them. It doesn't really matter where I put them. So I'm going to bring you over, modify, normalize. Grab you, bring it over, modify, normalize. So my duplications are in my bottom corners. So before I actually finish off, I've got one last thing I need to do, and it's just sorting out these overlaps. So what I need to do is basically grab this inner face and shrink it down, scale it down by pressing R and then dragging from the center. Because if I drag from one of these, I'm only moving one axis or scaling one axis, and I don't want to do that. Scale from the center. So if I scale in, I want to bring it into a point where it's just inside, something like that. But I'm doing that by eye, and I can't really do that for anything else because what if I want to start moving these UVs around to kind of make different box combinations later on? I've got to make sure that I'm doing this the exact same way for each of these so we've got consistency. So I'll bring that back, Control Z back. Really, really easy to do. It's just not necessarily noticeable or obvious. So I'm going to come up here in my UV toolkit. If you can't see this UV toolkit, if you come to Tools here, this might say Hide UV, so you're going to click it and then go click again, then Show UV toolkit, and it'll come back. So what I'm going to do is come to Transform right here, drop that down, move down to where I can see Scale, Step Snap. So where it says Step that Snap right here, I'm going to turn this on. But where it says this is basically the scaling which is going to scale. It's going to snap. So it's basically going to double in size. If I try and scale this now, it doubles in size. So it's going one size bigger than itself. There you go. What I'm instead going to do is change this to 0.1, essentially 10%. So change that to 0.1 right there. Press enter to confirm it. So now when I start to scale this, it's going to scale in little increments, so I can just bring that in. You can see there that I've given myself a little bit of a gap across the edges. We've got a little bit of a wasted space here. It's something we can't avoid. But now if I go around and do that, everything can be absolutely perfect to each other. So these two are absolutely perfect. For the bottom ones, or anything that you've overlapped, for the ones that you've overlapped, if I just drag a small selection box in the middle, I'm going to be grabbing both of them. I can scale those down, small selection box, scale those down. Perfect. So now all I need to do to actually finish off the entire process, the entire model, ready for texturing, is I can grab the entire thing in face mode, and then I'm going to move the manipulator so it's sitting on top of this area here. I want it sitting inside here. So remember that this area where you got the green and red arrow, or lines, this is your 0 to 1 space right here. This is where we need to put all our UVs so that it's actually getting registered for texturing. Because if they're not there, they're not necessarily going to be seen unless you start doing weird stuff in the background of our program. So I'm just going to move that so it's sat on top like that. So you can see where the red line is there, middle's there. Modify, normalize, bang. Perfect. So now the edge is sitting completely on the top there, down the sides, and then the edges of each one of these are actually perfectly aligned with each other. So there's very little to no wasted space. One thing you're going to hear from me a lot is wasted space, gray space. This is gray space right here. This is unused texture space. Now I could fill this in if I had something like, say, I was making little hemispherical nuts to go in the corners and stuff. I could create something like this. I could UV this, and then I could put stuff like that inside this area there. So I could even use that, like really, really small components inside of there, which I might do for pushing it further kind of thing. But for now, just keep it simple. We're done. That's a completely finished model, ready for texturing. All I've got to do now is File, Save Scene As, and UV incremental save. So you can see there, fairly straightforward, simple process. We started off with a cube. We deleted all but the bottom face, and then that face is left behind. Sorry, all but the top face. And then the face is left behind. That's what we create our crate side on. Using the extrude tool to extrude, offset it in, then extrude and thickness it down. Delete the black face which is left behind, and then you can select it in object mode, duplicate, Control D, and start rotating it in 90-degree axis. And if you just grab one of the colored circles in your rotate tool by pressing E, you're going to see what numbers in your channel box are actually getting updated. And that'll inform you, okay, if I start seeing numbers updating inside, say, rotate X, I know, okay, I'm going to turn that to either 90 degree, 180 degree, or 2070 degree, or minus that if it goes minus. From there, when everything's duplicated and moved around properly, and making sure that in your channel box you don't have any numbers that aren't 90, 0, 180, or 720. Sorry, 2070. You combine the entire thing so it's one selection group, and then you can merge everything to actually combine all the edges into a physical model. Press 3 just to check that smoothness, because if you can see there, if the model doesn't look like this, oops, there we go. If the model doesn't look like this, and you've got like a harsh edge on one side, you know something's going wrong. So then you can go back, investigate what's going wrong, fix the issue, combine, merge, all that jazz. From there, we're ready for UVing. So the UVing stuff is just selecting our object, deleting history so that we're working off a nice basic model, and then running that automatic projection, the cube UV icon, which is the green cube in the UV menu right here. See automatic projection. That's going to look at all the surfaces, break it up into what faces is facing and what axes, and then you've got to sew the little strips onto the big square, the associated square, Make sure everything's snapping to the grid, move the frames, snap them over the top of the plane, then make the four view by the set of four of them by normalizing them into that four grid. And then in the transform options in the UV editing tools, setting my step snap to 0.1, and then scale down each face, each center face with the four sides sewed on, scale it down effectively 20%. So this face is slightly smaller than the frame. And then when that's done, just select everything and then normalize that into the 0 to 1 space, and it's done. Quite simple. And that's it. You just keep doing that, and we're good. So hopefully that helps. This is a little bit of a longer video than what was in class, obviously, and this will be kind of the norm. A lot of these videos will be a little bit longer because it can take a little bit more time, and then you can also take time and listen through, pause at a certain point, carry on, catch up to me, make any notes. Notes are very important, remember, and then unpause the video, carry on from there. Right, so hopefully this helps, and I will see you in the next one.